And so, it happened. In a moment that will be studied for generations, the highest court in the land made a decision that sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in Washington and beyond. The Supreme Court has delivered a ruling that shakes the very foundation of U.S. trade policy and presidential power, sending a clear message that the balance of authority in America is not to be taken lightly. This historic decision overturns the legal basis for the Trump-era tariffs, marking a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over how much power the executive branch should wield in shaping economic policy. For years, these tariffs were justified under the guise of national security, but now, the legal landscape has shifted dramatically. The implications are enormous, rippling through every corner of the economy. From the prices Americans pay at the grocery store and the electronics aisle, to the way global alliances are formed and maintained, this ruling will touch the lives of millions. Businesses that rely on imported goods, as well as consumers who have felt the pinch of higher prices, are watching closely. The story began with a bold political promise to put America first by rewriting the rules of global trade, using tariffs as the main tool to protect American jobs and industries. This approach was championed as a way to revive domestic manufacturing and assert U.S. strength on the world stage. For years, these tariffs sparked heated trade wars, upended entire industries, and led to retaliatory measures from trading partners. American farmers, manufacturers, and consumers all felt the impact. Yet the legal authority behind these sweeping actions stood firm until now, when the Supreme Court decided to intervene. The Supreme Court's ruling directly challenges the very law that allowed presidents to act unilaterally on trade matters. By scrutinizing the limits of executive power, the justices have set a new precedent for how such decisions must be made in the future. The case was brought forward by a coalition of importers and manufacturers who argued that the executive branch had overstepped its constitutional bounds. They claimed that unchecked presidential authority threatened the stability and predictability that businesses depend on. Their core argument was simple but powerful. Congress, not the president, should regulate commerce with foreign nations. This principle, rooted in the Constitution, became the focal point of a national debate about the separation of powers. Today, the justices have redrawn the lines of power, telling the executive branch it cannot use national security as a blanket justification for sweeping economic penalties without clear and specific authorization from Congress. This decision reasserts the role of the legislative branch in shaping the nation's economic destiny. This is a fundamental shift in American governance, with aftershocks that will reshape trade, business, and presidential power for years, perhaps decades to come. The world is watching, and the next chapter in U.S. trade policy is just beginning. To truly grasp the impact of today's landmark Supreme Court ruling, we need to look back at the roots of the America First tariff strategy, a policy that has shaped the nation's economic landscape for years. The origins of this approach trace back to the 2016 presidential campaign, where Donald Trump made America First a rallying cry. He promised to bring back American jobs and industries, arguing that the U.S. had been taken advantage of by global competitors for decades. The Trump administration insisted that unfair trade practices, especially from China, had hollowed out U.S. manufacturing, shuttered factories, and even posed a threat to national security. The loss of these jobs, they argued, wasn't just economic, but a matter of American strength and independence. Their solution was bold: impose aggressive tariffs on imported goods, using Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 as justification. This rarely invoked law allowed the president to act if imports threatened national security. Originally, Section 232 was designed to protect industries vital to military readiness, like steel and aluminum, ensuring the U.S. could defend itself in times of crisis. But the Trump administration expanded the definition of national security to include economic stability, unleashing sweeping tariffs not just on rivals, but even on close allies. The move was controversial, sparking fierce debate at home and abroad. The result was a series of escalating trade wars. U.S. industries faced higher costs for raw materials, global supply chains were thrown into disarray, and American consumers began to feel the pinch at the checkout line. Supporters of the tariffs pointed to reopened factories and new jobs, claiming the measures had revived American manufacturing and protected workers from unfair competition. But opponents, including farmers, tech firms, and retailers, argued that tariffs acted as a hidden tax, raising prices for everyone and triggering foreign retaliation that hurt American exports. The economic landscape fractured, creating clear winners and losers. Some communities saw a resurgence, while others struggled with higher costs and lost markets. As the policy's impact deepened, the legal justification for these sweeping tariffs became a battleground, with critics challenging the president's broad interpretation of national security. The Supreme Court was ultimately asked to decide, had the president overstepped his authority in imposing such far-reaching tariffs under the guise of national security? Today, the answer is clear. The court ruled that the president had gone too far, marking a turning point in America's approach to trade and executive power. The legal fight against the tariffs was a slow, determined campaign led by businesses caught in the crossfire. They argued Section 232 was never meant as a tool for broad economic protectionism and that national security had been stretched beyond reason. The real issue: Congress's constitutional authority to regulate trade was being bypassed. Early court rulings deferred to presidential power, but challengers persisted. They shifted focus, arguing Section 232 was an unconstitutional delegation of legislative power, giving the president a blank check. This non-delegation doctrine argument finally gained traction. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, setting the stage for a historic decision. The Supreme Court's decision was sweeping. In a 6-3 opinion, the justices ruled that Section 232, as used, was an unconstitutional delegation of Congress's power. The law's vague definition of national security gave the president too much leeway to impose tariffs. The court overturned the tariffs on steel and aluminum, invalidating the legal foundation for those actions. Other tariffs, like those on China under different laws, remain unaffected. Dissenting justices warned this limits presidential flexibility in trade and national security. But the majority insisted Congress must set clear limits when delegating such power. The economic impact will be immediate. With Section 232 tariffs gone, U.S. manufacturers can import steel and aluminum at lower costs, likely reducing prices for cars, appliances, and more. Domestic producers lose protection, while industries using these metals gain a competitive edge. The job market will shift. Some manufacturing jobs may be at risk, but downstream industries could see gains. Businesses that restructured supply chains now face new uncertainty. Internationally, allies welcome the ruling as a return to predictable, rules-based trade. The decision could ease trade tensions and encourage cooperation. It's a signal U.S. trade policy will now require more diplomacy and legislative action. The checks and balances system is alive and well. Reaction was swift and divided. Business groups and importers cheered the ruling as a win for consumers and the Constitution. Domestic steel and aluminum industries, along with some unions, condemned it as a blow to American workers. Politicians split along party lines. Some hailed the decision as restoring congressional authority, others called it a gift to foreign competitors. International leaders, especially in Canada and Europe, welcomed the move as a step toward better relations. China's response was muted, watching for policy changes. The debate over trade and executive power is far from over. The immediate task facing policymakers and businesses is to unwind the Section 232 tariffs, a process that will require careful coordination between government agencies, importers, and exporters. These tariffs, which have been in place for years, have shaped the flow of steel and aluminum into the United States, affecting prices and supply chains across multiple industries. Customs officials will now stop collecting duties on steel and aluminum imports, signaling a major shift for companies that have paid millions in extra costs. Ports and border checkpoints will adjust their procedures, and businesses will need to quickly adapt to the new rules. Meanwhile, legal battles loom over whether importers will receive refunds for tariffs they paid in the past. Some companies are preparing lawsuits, hoping to recover significant sums, while others are bracing for a lengthy legal process that could take months or even years to resolve. The executive branch has lost a powerful tool for shaping trade policy, but it may look for new avenues under other trade laws, though these alternatives come with more hurdles and less flexibility than Section 232 provided. The real solution now lies with Congress. Lawmakers must decide whether to write a clearer, more specific law if they want to restore presidential authority to impose tariffs for national security reasons. This will require bipartisan cooperation and careful drafting to avoid repeating past mistakes. The upcoming legislative battle will shape U.S. trade policy for years to come, influencing how America responds to future economic and security threats from abroad. For consumers, the end of these tariffs could mean lower prices on goods ranging from cars to canned food. as manufacturers and retailers pass savings along. However, the long-term effects will depend on what Congress decides to do next. If lawmakers fail to act, the United States could be left without a key tool to address genuine threats to its industries and national security, potentially leaving the country more vulnerable in a rapidly changing global economy. The future of American trade policy has now shifted from the courtroom to Capitol Hill, where the next chapter will be written by lawmakers, not judges. This Supreme Court decision is about more than tariffs. It's a reset of power in Washington. For decades, presidents have gained more authority over trade and national security. The court's ruling pushes back, reviving limits on what Congress can delegate. Future trade policy will require more debate, compromise, and legislation, not unilateral action. The presidency itself is changed. No more blank check for tariffs under vague national security claims. The challenge now is to build a new consensus that's both constitutional and effective. The decision marks the end of one era and the start of another, with Congress, the president, and the public shaping what comes next. The gavel has fallen. Now the real work begins.